What happens when a student writes an op-ed the government doesn't like? One graduate student was snatched off the street by masked agents. Was this law or intimidation? Today, Rep. Jayapal grills Secretary Rubio, exposing an alarming threat to free speech in America.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Rubio, for being here. On March 21st, 2025, the State Department approved the revocation of a student visa for Rümeysa Öztürk, a Turkish citizen who is a graduate student at Tufts University, apparently simply for writing an op-ed. According to an internal State Department memo, you took this action under your discretionary authority to revoke visas, and soon after you revoked her visa, armed and masked plainclothes officers snatched Ms. Öztürk off the street and transported her to a prison in Louisiana. Mr. Secretary, do you really think that Ms. Öztürk's op-ed results in a foreign policy consequence for the United States?
I believe that case involves someone whose visa we never would have granted had we known ahead of time.
I'm not asking you that question. I'm asking you if you think an op-ed, if an op-ed, which, but that's exactly, in fact, what happened. The State Department wrote a memo concluding that you did not have sufficient grounds to revoke Ms. Öztürk's visa. There was no evidence showing that she'd engaged in any activities or a threat to national security. And in fact, in May, a federal court ordered Ms. Öztürk's release from detention, noting that the sole basis for the government's detention appeared to be the fact that she co-authored this opinion piece in the Tufts newspaper in March of 2024. Where in the Constitution does it say that the Secretary of State can override the First Amendment protections of free speech? Is there a footnote that I missed somewhere?
There's no constitutional right to a student visa.
But is there a constitutional right? Does it say somewhere that Marco Rubio gets to determine which speech is appropriate and revoke student visas based on what you think constitutes free speech?
There's a statute that says the Secretary of State gets to determine whether someone is a threat. We deny visas every day all over the world.
Do you think that the Immigration and Nationality Act trumps the Constitution of the United States, Mr. Secretary?
Well, Congress can always change the law if you want, but I'm telling you,
Mr. Secretary,
while I have the authority, I will continue to revoke the visas of these people that come here to tear this country.
You said that, Mr. Secretary. Let me reclaim my time, because you are talking about revoking student visas based on what somebody says, and that means that you are trumping the legal supreme court, the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution of the United States.
No one has a right to a student visa.
Mr. Rubio, why did the administration need to use masked, armed, unidentified agents to whisk somebody off the street and deny her counsel for almost 24 hours after her arrest?
Well, you'll have to ask the agencies that did that work. I'm not responsible for that. I'm responsible for revoking the visas of these people that come to tear this country apart.
Secretary Rubio, I'm talking about this particular case where you revoked the student visa of a Turkish citizen who was a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that you didn't like. And suddenly you allowed for masked men to whisk her off the street. And you have multiple jobs, apparently. You're the national security advisor as well. So don't tell me it's not your job who snatches her off the street.
We don't do the snatching, but I can tell you we do the visa revocations.
Let me ask you about the national security consequences of people, masked men on the streets, snatching people off the streets. If these are legitimate law enforcement agents carrying out proper arrests, why are they hiding their identities?
Because then radical crazies will try to hurt them.
So you think that U.S. agents who have almost always gone without face coverings, even when they're arresting some of the country's most dangerous criminals, suddenly have so much to fear from a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that they need to be masked? Is that
that law student was a guest in the United States on a student visa. No one's entitled to a student visa.
So you revoked her student visa based on an op-ed, which trumps the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution.
Someone's coming up here to stir up problems on our campus. We're going to revoke their visa.
She didn't do any of that. She wrote an op-ed. She wrote an op-ed, and I'm talking to you about her particular case.
Claims and your claims. Those are not the facts.
Reclaiming my time, you revoked her student visa because she
proudly
wrote an op-ed.
Would you revoke? We're going to do more.
I have another question for you. Would you revoke the visa of someone in the United States who published claims that, quote, Jews are an untrustworthy and dangerous group? Yes or no?
We will revoke the visa of anyone who's in this country as a guest who's here to stir up trouble.
Are you going to revoke the visa of somebody who made that?
I mean, the case, I'll look at it. I'm looking to get crazy people
actually, it's not just about revoking. You actually, Secretary Rubio, excuse me, reclaiming my time. Can you explain to me why the Trump administration granted refugee status to Charles Kleinhaus, the white Afrikaner who tweeted that exact statement that I just said? There's the case.
That's not a visa.
You granted that person to enter the United States.
That's someone that applied here through a totally different process. Student visas are a privilege.
Secretary
Rubio, deny them all the time, and we'll revoke
revoked a visa based on an op-ed, and then you allowed for masked men to snatch somebody off the street.
Your time is expired.
That's your claim. That's not accurate.
Recognize Ranking Member Meeks for a closing statement.
What we just witnessed is a stunning confrontation over the very principles at the heart of American democracy: freedom of speech, due process, and the rule of law. Representative Pramila Jayapal put Secretary Rubio on the hot seat over the revocation of a student visa for Remeza Oturk, a Turkish graduate student at Tufts University, simply because she co-authored an op-ed. That's right, her words, her ideas, not any criminal act, triggered a chain of events that included masked, armed agents snatching her off the street and holding her without counsel. Jayapal's questioning highlighted an extraordinary tension: the Secretary of State claiming the power to override constitutional protections because, in his words, there's no constitutional right to a student visa. But let's pause and think about that. While there's no guaranteed right to a visa, there is a constitutional right to free speech, a right that this administration seems willing to sidestep in the name of discretionary authority. Rubio repeatedly insisted that visa revocations are routine and justified under the Immigration and Nationality Act. But what about the human cost? A graduate student snatched from her life, detained without access to counsel, all because of her written opinions? Jayapal's line of questioning exposes a fundamental problem: the conflation of discretionary executive power with the suppression of dissenting voices, and the alarming willingness to send armed, masked agents to enforce that discretion. This isn't just about one student, it's about the precedent this sets for anyone who dares to express ideas that conflict with the administration's preferences. And it raises a critical question for the public. When the executive branch uses fear and force to silence speech, where does that leave our democracy? This exchange underscores the importance of congressional oversight and holding officials accountable. Lawmakers like Jayapal are pushing back, demanding answers, and exposing the tension between executive authority and constitutional rights. For viewers, the takeaway is clear. The protection of civil liberties depends not just on the courts, but on active, fearless scrutiny by elected representatives. Remember, staying informed is the first step toward defending your rights. If this matters to you, share this video, subscribe for updates, and keep watching as we continue to break down these critical hearings.